Jean Piaget is one of the most influential psychologists in the history of the field. What Piaget was doing is he was studying how people learn, not just how people learn facts, but how people learn to think. He was studying cognitive development, the development of thinking abilities such as attention and perception and the development of intelligence. And what Piaget would do is he'd have studies in which he would give children problem-solving tasks, and then he'd ask them questions about it to find out what they understood of the world and what problems they could solve given their age. From these studies, Piaget developed his stage theory of cognitive development. He said that every single person throughout their childhood goes through 4 stages of trying to understand and make sense of the world. In 1969, he worked with his collaborator Barbel and Helder to publish a short book of 160 pages. That book's called The Psychology of the Child, which is a summary of Piaget's work, which I'm going to summarize here. The big idea of Piaget's theory, the big idea is something called constructivism. Constructivism means that people learn through action, by actively constructing, building up their understanding of the world. Piaget's constructivist idea is that you begin with a bunch of things that you already know. He calls it a scheme or a schema, an existing map of the world. And then you act in the world. You perform actions, and through action you extend and you build up and you fill in the gaps and you improve and increase that map of the world. All learning is based on action. Therefore learning, and therefore teaching, needs to be active and it needs to be concrete, based on practical, real world examples and experiences. The first stage is called the sensory motor stage, from birth until about 18 years old or until 2 years old. In the sensory motor stage, your understanding of the world is limited to sensory input that's coming in, what you can hear, what you can feel, what you can see, and also motor output. And at the very beginning, when you're very young, your motor output is limited to reflexes such as the palmar grasping reflex, being able to close and open your hands. When you're in the sensory motor stage, you don't understand objects. What I mean by that is that you understand that you're seeing and hearing a lot of things, but you don't understand how that relates to the real physical world. If you have a child who's looking at or playing with an orange building block, then the child can say, oh yeah, that's an orange shape, can understand that they're looking at an orange shape, but doesn't understand that the orange shape refers to something that actually exists in the real world. They don't understand objects. They don't understand that something is the same object if it's, further away and looks smaller, or if it's at a different angle. And they don't understand that something exists if it's not immediately within their sensation. And this is why children get so excited, young children get so excited when you play peekaboo with them, and you put your hands in front of your face, then you show them yourself again, and you do this, and they get very excited because when your hands are in front of you, they don't realise that you exist anymore. What happens in this stage is first you have your reflexes, and then that can build up to habits of movement, and then you can have more movements in different situations, you can develop new movements. And what you can start to do now is move things around and interact with the world. So how do people learn about the existence of objects? That there's such a thing as a permanent object. This is called object permanence. The way that people learn that objects are real things is by interacting with them. You pick it up, you put it down again, you look away, you look back at it, and what happens is through these actions you realise that despite whatever actions you perform, that object, that orange building block, remains constant. There's something permanent about it despite your actions. And so it's through action that you understand that objects exist. And once you understand the existence of objects, you understand space, because objects exist in space. You understand time, because you can move objects in a sequence. I can move it there and then I can move it back. And you also understand causation, because you can cause a change in the objects, and also you understand the movement of one object can cause the movement of another. And so from action, we get understanding of time and space and causation. From action, you can make sense of all the stimuli in the world. The second stage is the pre-operational stage. This is from ages 2 until 7. The pre-operational stage is characterized by the development of symbolic function. So you can represent things in action, such as imitation and play. For example, pretending to be somebody else. You can also represent things as ideas. You can have mental representation, such as mental images and language. And so what that means is now you can think of things which aren't immediately present. You can use mental images, that gives you recall memory, and you can use language to think about things that aren't limited to your immediate perception. It frees you to understand the past and also the future. The pre-operational stage is also characterized by a limited and a subjective understanding of objects. You know that there are objects, but your understanding of objects is limited. Because remember, what you've done is you've grown your understanding of the world based on your own movements, but still it's based on your own movements, and so you have a hard time understanding things outside of yourself, understanding things from somebody else's point of view. At this stage, I know that this person is my brother, but I have a hard time understanding that from his point of view, I am the brother. At this stage, you think that the world operates in the same way that you operate. I have consciousness, I have thoughts and feelings, and I cause things. Therefore, if something is caused, it must be because something wanted it. That's why the kids are asking why all the time. So when you say, why is the sun setting? The child doesn't want an explanation from the physics behind it. The child is really asking, why does the sun want to set? Because it's assuming that the sun and everything else has thoughts and feelings just like the child himself does. One of the main things which characterizes the pre-operational stage is the lack of operations. Remember before I said that you can move the building block and you can move it back. That is a reversible physical action. That teaches you that the building block is a permanent object. A operation, to use Piaget's term, an operation is a mental action, a reversible mental action. Being able to use your thoughts to simulate action. So instead of just acting out in the world, you can imagine actions, and you can do so by understanding different properties of objects and the relationships between those properties. And at the pre-operational stage, children aren't yet able to do this. Here is a classic example of one of Piaget's studies. You take two glasses with the same volume of water. You take the water in one glass and you pour it into another glass. And this other glass is thinner but taller. So now you have two glasses, one of which is thinner and taller. And you ask children in the pre-operational stage which one has more water, and the children in the pre-operational stage say that second one, because it's taller, because it's bigger. Children who are in the concrete operational stage, that's the next stage from ages about 7 until 12, children at the concrete operational stage actually correctly say that there is the same volume. Now, you might ask, why is that such a difficult question? It turns out that in order to answer that question, to know whether the amount of water in one is more or less or the same than the other, you need to understand the properties of objects. You need to understand objects objectively and the relationships between their properties. You need to understand the volume and the width and the height, and you need to understand that the volume is a function of the width and the height. That if the height decreases, but the width increases, then they make up for each other and the volume stays the same. So that's a bit of a calculation. And that's what you can do in the concrete operational stage. You understand the properties of objects. You have an objective understanding of objects. And that is where you can understand classification. You can classify things. You can put them into series. This thing, then this thing, then this thing. And from that you get an understanding of number. Even though you can transform objects in your mind, these operations, these transformations, is limited to concrete physical options. At this stage, if you're teaching children at this stage, let's say you want to teach them how to divide. It doesn't make sense to show them the equation A equals B over C. That's too abstract. You would have to give concrete, real-world examples. For example, sharing slices of pizza. The final stage is the formal operational stage, which is age 12 onwards. In the formal operational stage, not only are you able to mentally transform objects, you can also mentally transform ideas. And the way that you do this is with what Piaget calls a combinatorial matrix, which means that you can understand all the possible ways that something could happen. Here's an example. Let's imagine that you're playing a board game and the rule is that you roll 2 dice, you add up the scores of those dice, and then you move that number. So if I score a 5 and a 2, I add that together to make a 7, and I move 7. If you ask children in the concrete operational stage, how likely are you to get a 7? Children in that stage have a very difficult time answering. Maybe they'll try to go step by step. What happens if you get a 1 and a 1, a 1 and a 2, a 1 and a 3? And a lot of the time they just give up, or they say it's impossible, it can't be worked out. In the formal operational stage, children do have the ability to answer these questions. According to Piaget, they are able to quickly and efficiently work out all the possible combinations of those different dice rolls, and then work out, there's 36 ways of doing it, a sixth of those give you a 7, therefore the probability of getting a 7 is 1 in 6. What you can do at the formal operational stage is you can imagine all the possible things that could happen. So you can have combinations, mental combinations of objects. And even higher than that, at a higher level of abstraction, you can also have combinations of different ideas. If I say all swans are white, then there are a few logical claims that you can work out from that at the formal operational stage. There is the direct claim, if swan, then white. There's the negation, the thing that would prove it wrong, the inverse, which is, if you see a black swan, then all swans are white is wrong. There's the reciprocal, if white then swan, and then there's also something called the correlative, which is the thing that the first statement also allows, which is there can be white things but are not swans. What you can do at the formal operational stage is you can combine different ideas, like how before you were able to combine different properties of objects, so that you can work out which idea is mutually exclusive to which other idea. This allows you to have a propositional operation where you can hold an idea in your head, a hypothesis that you've just thought up, an idea, and then you can compare it to how the world would work if that idea was true. That's a concrete operation. And then you can compare that to what actually happens in the world. And so you can test hypotheses. And so what's happening is you're growing up into a scientist. So what happens is, first of all, you use your action to understand objects, first subjectively, then objectively, and then you can mentally transform objects, and then you can mentally transform ideas. There are some valid criticisms of Piaget's work. For example, he tended to use very small samples of children. It's not obvious that what's true of a few children is true for all the children. Another limitation of Piaget's studies is sometimes the children that he was studying didn't understand the tasks that he was doing. And also, what he was doing is he was asking children questions, but these children are still learning language, so maybe they can't explain themselves properly. And so what that did is that led Piaget to underestimate the cognitive abilities of children. It turns out they actually develop their thinking abilities faster than Piaget concluded. The big idea still holds that people learn about the world through action and adding to their existing knowledge. And therefore all learning is about action.